Alrighty, welcome back to Unreal Engine Indy. We left off where we could do damage to the enemy, and we could see it when we looked at the details tab and we looked at the health, and it went down, and then we had a debug message that said enemy died. So what we need to do is have the enemy attack the player now. And what I would like to do is just have it so where the enemy can move around. So let's go ahead and start on that. I am going to go over a behavior tree tutorial series, but it's going to be a different one. So what I'm going to do now is just get the player moving around in just a basic blueprints. And after this series is wrapped up, if you want to go into behavior trees and look how it's done in C++, then you can jump into that. So let's get started. First thing we are going to need to do is, first we're going to need a nav mesh bound. So let's put that in there so I don't forget it. It's a nav mesh bounds volume. I'm going to drop that right in front, and I'm just going to scale it up a little bit. I don't need it too big. I just want to be able to get it so where we can just have the enemy move around a little bit. And that should be good. So let's go into the enemy blueprint. We are going to do this with blueprints, and it's basically prototyping the movement, and then we can do it later in the behavior trees. Right now I just want to get it working, and then later on remove the blueprint logic and replace it with the behavior tree. So what we're going to need, we are going to need two variables. I do know that. It's going to have to be can see player and chasing the player. So we're going to be using pawn sensing. So let's go to variables and let's do can see player. That's going to be a Boolean. And we're going to have another one that says chasing player. And let's go into, right now we just need to go into the add component, do a pawn sensing. And once you add the pawn sensing component, you can come down here and click on see pawn. Click on that and you'll have that right there. I'm just going to move this up. So what I have is the on see pawn sensing and the event tick. And I know with the on see pawn sensing, we're going to need to say cast to Wukong character blueprint, because we just want Wukong moving around, and when it can see the player it needs to be able to attack. And we're going to need a sequence, so you can just hold down S and then click the left mouse button, and that will give you a sequence. And then from there we want to do the can see player. We need to set that, and the chasing player we need to set that as well. And the first sequence we're going to do is we're just going to get this lined up, and can see player is true, chasing player is true, and we need this to be, because right here in the pawn sensing, I'm really not going to change this except for, yeah, let's change this a little bit. Hearing threshold, don't care about that. Sight radius, let's just do, I don't know, 2000. Let's see what that's like. And we'll just hit compile and save. So the sensing interval is 0.5 seconds. So we need this to be retriggerable. So we just need to do a retriggerable delay. Since it's 0.5 there, we just need to do 0.6. Just have it set slightly above, and then we need to do the can see player. I'm just going to copy and paste that, unclick it to be false, and we'll set that. So what this does is on see player, we cast it to the Wukong character. We do a sequence of it can see the player, true, it's chasing the player, true. And then what we want to do is do an AI move to. So just right click, AI move to, and this one right here, move to or actor location, just do an AI move to. Hook that up. And if you notice, I'm using the electronic nodes. It's just a plug-in. It makes the blueprints look a little bit nicer. And from the pawn, we can just right-click and do a self, get a reference to self, and we'll just go ahead and plug that in. And the target actor needs to be a Wukong. So what we'll do, we'll just double-click and reroute this right over here. So what this is going to do, we added the pawn sensing component, and it's in a 2000 radius. On C pawn, we cast to Wukong character blueprint. It's a sequence. The first thing we're going to do, can see player, set to true, chasing the player, yes. And then we're going to do an AI move to. And the target actor is, of course, the Wukong character. There we go. So the next one we need to do is we need to do an event tick, because this, the player will just, not the player, the enemy will just sit there, but I want it to kind of roam around a little bit. So we do chasing player, let's do a branch. Hold down B, click the left mouse button, we'll do a branch, and then we'll do chasing player. Chasing player, and if that is false, then what we need to do is do a random roam. So what I want to do is, I know it's going to be random, and it needs to have like a delay. So hold down D, click the left mouse button. Needs to be a delay. So the duration, I'm just going to do a random float in range. And that's just going to be from 1 second to 5 seconds. And we're just going to hook that up to the duration. And then from there, we need to do an AI move to. And AI move to, of course, we need a reference to self. Get a reference to self. Hook that up. No, move to location actor. Let's delete that. AI move to. I'm just going to come over here and copy this. Paste that in. Make sure it's AI move to. And then hook that up to the pawn. Now the random, get random reachable radius, I believe it is. So what we need to do is we need to first get the actor location. Then what we want to do is get random reachable point in radius. And then from there, random location, we hook that up to the destination. And I believe that is all we are going to need. So if we jump back in here and we click play, and it's not moving. And the reason it did not roam around is because a random reachable point in radius. If the radius is 0, well, it's not going to roam around. Let's just do 1000. Go ahead and click that, and let's just jump back in, click play, and we'll see if it roams around. And it's roaming around. Of course, it doesn't have any animations because we don't have any animation blueprint set up or any blend spaces. But what we have is a enemy AI that just roams around in a random point, and then when it can see Wukong, it actually comes up right to Wukong. Now we don't have it set so where if it loses sight, then that's fine. And in the behavior trees, we're going to be setting it up so where it focuses the player. So when the player turns around, the enemy will keep focus on the player. But we're not going to worry about that. This is just to be able to get something working real quick. So we left off with the enemy being able to roam around and then be able to see the player and chase after the player. And what we need to do is have it attack. So I was thinking about doing this with an overlap, but with C++, but there's something I want to show you that I think is extremely useful for overlapping and interfaces, using interfaces for like overlapping. So like right here we have pawn sensing and you cast to Wukong. When you do like an overlap and you want to cast to the character you're overlapping, but there's another way of doing it. So let's go ahead and just add in a spear. Let's say a spear collision. And this is just going to be the attack spear. This is just prototyping something real quick so we can see how this is all going to work. And of course it's going to be redone using behavior trees. So like right here you have an attack spear. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. Let's say 300. So when the player is within 300, enemy's going to trigger to attack. So let's go over here, and how you would normally do it is you would had like an on component hit, on component begin overlap. There we go. Go ahead and do that. Now how you would normally do this is you would cast to Wukong character blueprint. You would cast to Wukong character blueprint, and then let's say print string and attack. So this is how normally most people would think about doing it. So when you come over here, if I can get it to, so the print string was attack. So an attack. So there's a different way of doing it, and that is using interfaces so you don't have to cast. So let's go ahead and delete this. We'll go ahead and keep this on component begin overlap. We'll go ahead and keep that. What we are going to do is compile save. We are going to jump in to the C++ section. We're going to go over to public character. Now we are going to right click new C++ class, scroll all the way down to the bottom. You'll see Unreal Interface. Click on that. And I'm going to call this Wukong character interface, and we're going to create the class, and it's done. Okay. All right, so now that that's done, let's jump into the editor, and what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to open up a Wukong character .h, and right inside here, which says Wukong API, a Wukong public character, what I am going to do is come over here and say public, say public I Wukong character interface. So you have to come over here and class Wukong API, the a Wukong character, and it extends the public a character. And what we're going to do is we are going to use public I for interface, Wukong character interface. Let's go ahead and see if we can do a hot reload. Okay, so now that we have that interface, we've done the hot reload, we can use that interface. So let's go where it says other actor. What you want to do is you can right click and say does implement interface, and you want the other actor to be the test object, and the interface you want it to be the Wukong character interface. And you can hold down B, left click, get a branch, and if that condition is true, so if the other actor overlapping, which is going to be Wukong, if it does implement the interface that we just created in C++, if that condition is true, then we want to print string, and we want it to say interface attack. So now we can come back here, and instead of casting to Wukong, we can just say does implement interface, so interface attack. So that is how you can do it without having to use casting. So the on begin overlap, you can have an interface to the character and just say does implement interface like we did here, Wukong character, and have a branch if that condition is true. If it does implement the interface, then you go ahead and do your logic. Okay, so we've done the interface, and with the overlap we have it so where it does implement interface and we're able to interact with it. So now what we need to do is we are going to have the main logic of the attacking inside C++. But that C++ function needs to be called within blueprints because that's where we're using the overlap. So what we are going to do is do a U function. We're going to have this blueprint callable, and we're going to avoid enemy main attack. Okay, so then we just need to hover over it, and we need to generate the definition. So inside here, I'm just going to do a screen debug text, and I'm just going to say called from enemy class. So we know that that is called. This is where the logic of the enemy main attack is going to be. So when we create a montage and things like that, we're going to be calling it inside of the enemy main attack. So let's go ahead and see if a hot reload will work. Successful. So what we need to do is we have on component begin overlap, does it implement the interface, the Wukong character interface? Well, it should, because we have this attack Wukong, but we don't want this anymore. We want the enemy main attack. This is the one we want because we just created it in C++. So let's go ahead, compile this, save. So what we have just did is we went into the enemy.h, we did a U function blueprint callable, and then we did a void enemy main attack. Inside the enemy main attack, we just did called from enemy class. So this is where the logic for the attack is going to be. So now when we jump back here into the blueprint, we can call that function because we made it blueprint callable. Let's go ahead and see if our function called from enemy class. So that all works now. So now we can do a blueprint callable function. So what you need to do now is, and we've done this for the Wukong character, go ahead and try out and see about creating a montage within here. In enemy.h, create a montage. Go ahead and set up the montage. Go ahead and try to set up a blend space as well and get that working for the enemy, because the next videos we do, I'm going to be doing that, so you can double check to make sure that you did everything correct. And actually, if it's working, more than likely you did it correctly. So let's go ahead and try that. And if you want to go into actually if you can get the montage working so that it is attacking, you can even try to go out and create the collisions for the weapons, and when it overlaps the player, you can apply damage. It's basically the same thing we did for Wukong applying damage to the enemy, except for it's in reverse. Also, we're not going to be using an interface for when the enemy attacks Wukong. So that will be the next lessons coming up. So bye for now.